A few weeks ago, clips about a fascinating historical moment started popping up in my social media feeds. At first, I was like, yeah, okay, it's interesting, but whatever. They were each pointing out the importance of a document called the Flushing Remonstrance. Now, I like the word remonstrance right away. As a lover of words, remonstrance has a great ring to it. It means a forcefully reproachful protest. So this document was written 369 years ago in 1657 by residents of the town of Flushing in what was then the Dutch colony of New Netherland, now Queens, New York. At the time, the newly arriving Quakers were being persecuted for their unusual beliefs. They thought crazy stuff, like women were equal to men and that we all possessed our own direct connection to God. How radical! They were viewed as troublesome, dangerous, different. The Director General of the colony, Peter Stuyvesant, cracked down hard on any who gave them shelter and brutally tortured one Quaker in particular nearly to death. And that's when a group of ordinary citizens decided to object. Now, what makes the story remarkable is that none of the people signing the document were Quakers. They weren't defending themselves. They were defending others. They were standing up for people who worshiped differently, believed differently, and lived differently than they did. Think about how extraordinary that is. Human beings often stand up for themselves. It's much harder to stand up for someone else, especially someone whose life is different from their own, especially when doing so could cost them dearly. And yet, there they were in 1657, using their voices on behalf of their neighbors. When I first learned this story, I naturally imagined myself among those courageous people who signed the document. But something happened this week that made me change the way I see the story. At my church, I hosted a public conversation with my friend, the Reverend Dr. Deborah Moylan. Debbie, as it happens, is an ordained minister of the Assemblies of God tradition, a denomination that continues to oppose same-sex relationships and marriage. But through her own years of study, prayer, ministry, and relationship, Debbie has grown into a thoughtful advocate for LGBTQ inclusion within her denomination and wider Christianity. And as I prepared for this event, I suddenly realized something. I wasn't one of the people signing the document. I was one of the Quakers. For centuries, someone like me would not have been welcome in most Christian pulpits. Maybe any. An openly gay man, married to another openly gay man. Certainly not serving as the minister of this church. And yet, here I am, the 18th minister of a congregation founded in 1653. A congregation that was only 4 years old when the Flushing Remonstrance was written. Think about that for a moment. While those citizens were signing that document, my church already existed. And for most of the centuries that followed, someone like me would never have been permitted to stand in its pulpit. And yet here I am. And what I love is that among the least interesting things to my congregation about my ministry is the fact that I'm gay. They couldn't care less. Except for how I love to make things more fabulous, of course. They love that part. But think about that. What a remarkable arc of history. But what moves me the most is not the history. It's the compassion. The realization that my friend Debbie is doing for me what the residents of Flushing did for the Quakers. She is using her prophetic voice on behalf of people whose experience is not her own. She is taking a risk that she does not have to take. And now I suddenly understand something I had never quite recognized before. History does repeat itself, but so does compassion. Again and again, throughout history, ordinary people have looked at those who were being marginalized and against the great tide of popular fear and falsehood said, no, they belong here too. Again and again, someone crossed a line of difference and chose solidarity over silence. Again and again, there are people who decided that another person's dignity matters. I asked Debbie several years ago about her scriptural stance on accepting the gay community, and she reminded me that Jesus consistently moved toward the people everyone else was moving away from. The outcast, the outsider, the marginalized, the forgotten. He didn't ask whether helping them would be popular. He recognized their humanity before anyone else did. And then he stood beside them. That is our invitation too. Take a moment and think about the people in our world who are different from you. Different religion, different race, different politics, different culture, different orientation, different life experience. And then look deeper. Because beneath all those differences is a real-life human being who wants the same things you want. To be safe, to be loved, to belong, to matter, to live with dignity. And every one of us has opportunities to stand beside someone whose experience is different from our own. Not because we're the same, but because we're human. The residents of Flushing understood that. My friend Debbie understands that. Jesus understood that. And so maybe the next chapter of that story is waiting to be written by us. Who will we stand beside? Whose dignity will we defend? Whose humanity will we recognize? Because history does not only remember courage, it remembers compassion. It remembers the people who used their voices on behalf of someone else. It remembers the people who crossed a line of difference and said, you also belong here. And compassion, thankfully, has a way of repeating itself too.